When we think of street gangs, most people would think first black and Hispanic gangs. But actually, Europeans were the first street gangs in America. Many of these European immigrants were criminals before they came to America, and many who grew up in impoverished neighborhoods turned to gangs. You had Jewish gangs, Italian gangs, Greek gangs, and Irish gangs. Okay? And also you had white American gangs. This is the list of gangs that you had in mainly Chicago, but throughout America. You had the so-called social athletic clubs formed of young white boys. These athletic clubs were baseball players, basketball players, and various other sports. But the reason this is on the list is because these athletic clubs acted as gangs. They intimidated black boys. You had the greaser gangs. These gangs were scattered all across the America, okay? You had them in Chicago, you had them in New York, you had them in California, okay? You even had them in Australia and the UK and England and all these different places like that, okay? And these greaser gangs usually wore the black leather coats, the white t-shirts, the jeans with the boots, okay? And they had their hair greased back. Almost as if like you think of someone like Fonzarelli from the show Happy Days, okay? He was the depiction of the typical greaser. Or the movie Grease, starring John Travolta. He was the image, of course, as the typical greaser as well. Hence, the name of the movie was called Grease. You had the Gaylords, the almighty C-Notes, the almighty Taylor Jousters. You had the Shy West, the Playboys, the United Five. All these gangs fought against black and Hispanic communities. But not to mention that you had Afro-Hispanics and you had Hispanics that will categorize themselves as Spaniards. Many of these types of Hispanics made affiliation with Italian gangs, Jewish gangs, and various other white gangs to fight against the blacks. These white gangs were created to keep blacks out of certain areas of the city where they resided. This shows us that white gangs played a role in keeping blacks marginalized and ran down slum neighborhoods. Black gangs would gather weapons and gang up just to go to a movie theater in a white neighborhood.
These were the sons and the daughters of the southern migrants.
My older brother and his friends had already started this gang on 75th Street. Their enemies were mainly the white gangs, because at that time, right on the other side of these railroad tracks was a white gang called the Diablos, and they felt like it was their duty to keep black people from crossing over to the other side of the railroad tracks, from enjoying the Capitol Theater or whatever was offered on their side of these tracks.
Ahmed Rahman was born in 1950. His parents were from Vicksburg, Mississippi, but his world was the south side of Chicago.
I remember my older brother coming home one day. He had a chain, I think he had a knife, and his friends had zip guns and crowbars. And he said, we got into the Capitol Theater tonight. And that was my first experience of integration.
The KKK was a white gang in the South to intimidate and instill fear in Hebrews in the South. The KKK was deputized by the state and government to roll out their agendas. It was no difference with the white street gangs in the inner cities within the northern, western, and eastern states. The white street gangs had the backings of the mayor, the state, and even various European mafia groups to intimidate Hebrews. I will use Chicago white street gangs for an example. When we look at the symbols of the European white street gangs that ran in the inner cities of America, we see no difference in the symbols as the KKK, the neo-Nazis. We even see Freemasonry symbols and all type of other occultic symbols. Many of these gangs were racist, and that's how the first black and Hispanic street gangs came about. Many of the so-called black people, who are the Hebrews, these boys formed street gangs to fight against the European gangs. But the thing is, they didn't even have to do that. This is why we're in the condition that we are in today. Those street gangs did nothing for us. What we needed to do was turn back to the Almighty Yah, and we will always defeat our enemies. This is the secret that they keep from us, so they keep us in sin. They flood our streets with crack and guns and money, okay, illegal money. As we read in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 7, it says, Yah shall cause your enemies that rise up against you to be defeated before your face. They shall come out against you one way and run before you 7 ways, okay? So right here, he's showing us that if we turn to him, we will defeat our enemies. But those boys that created those gangs, they were still sinning, and they were also fighting against other black Hebrew gangs, okay? And this is why we're in the condition that we are in today. Even these Hebrew black street gangs are killing one another and destroying their own neighborhoods. So why don't you see many of these white European street gangs today? Well, many of them are still around. They're being ran secretly, okay? We have to understand that white gangs were able to work with the politicians, with the state, and with the government. So I believe that many of these street gangs are still doing this to this day. Many white gang members were able to rise through the ranks of society and gain careers and become politicians, okay? This was prophesied when he told us that the strangers will rise above us and we will come down low, and they will be above us and we will be beneath them. Many black gang members wasn't able to do this. They were not able to leave the gangs once they reached 21 and 22 and 23 years old and go on and form careers and become mayors and governors and all these different things. They was not able to do this. As we see in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43 to 44, it says, The stranger that is within you shall get up above you very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to you, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Due to racial injustice in the 60s and 70s and being marginalized in impoverished areas that turned further to the streets, make no mistake about it, even though the powers that be are doing everything in their might to destroy us, it's our own choice to willingly keep sinning and being a rebellious people that keeps us in this condition.